When my 9-year-old grandson burst into the operating room, everyone froze. The doctors, the nurses, even the air stood still. He clutched a broken phone and whispered, "Grandma, don't do it. They're lying to you." That single sentence changed everything. If you're watching this video, please like and subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments where you're listening to my story from. We love hearing how far these stories of courage and survival can travel. When the nurse told me my son might die without a transplant, the world around me went silent. It wasn't the kind of silence that comforts, it was the kind that crushes, that makes your ears ring and your heart pound like a drum of panic. The doctor's lips were still moving, but I barely heard the words. Kidney failure. Urgent. Only one compatible donor. My name. My name was written in red on the paper. I was 68, widowed, and had already buried one child in my lifetime. I thought I knew what grief was, but this was different. Before I could take a breath, my daughter-in-law Melissa leaned toward me. Her perfume, sharp and heavy, filled the air between us. Her eyes didn't blink. Her tone was calm, almost rehearsed. "It's your duty, Mom. You're his mother. Who else would do it?" Duty. That word hit me harder than any diagnosis. I had spent my life living by that word, working double shifts, selling pies in the market, scrubbing laundry until my fingers bled. Duty had been the reason I kept going when my husband became bedridden, the reason I never complained when money ran out. And now, duty was the weapon she used to corner me. I looked at my son Andrew lying pale on the hospital bed. His lips were cracked, his skin gray, his breathing shallow. I thought of the years I carried him to school through winter snow, the nights I stayed awake when he had a fever, whispering prayers I barely believed in. "He's my boy," I said softly, my throat tight. "Of course I'll do whatever it takes." Melissa smiled, a small, quick curve of her mouth that disappeared as soon as it appeared. "That's what I hoped you'd say." She placed a form in front of me and pointed to the dotted line. "Sign here. The sooner we do this, the better." My hand trembled as I picked up the pen. I didn't even read the fine print. My eyes blurred with tears that wouldn't fall. The paper under my fingers felt like ice. Somewhere, deep inside, a small voice whispered, "Something isn't right." But Melissa's presence was so strong, so certain, that it drowned every doubt. I signed my name. The moment the pen left the paper, I felt a strange heaviness in my chest, as if I had just made a promise I wasn't meant to keep. Melissa thanked the doctor with her sweetest voice, the kind she never used at home, and then turned to me. "You're doing the right thing," she said. "After all, mothers live for their children, don't they?" I nodded, but inside I felt hollow. I didn't know it then, but that hollow feeling was the first crack in everything I thought I knew about love, family, and trust. That night, I couldn't sleep. The house was quiet except for the slow creak of my husband's wheelchair and the rhythmic hiss of the oxygen tank beside his bed. I sat by the window, watching the streetlights flicker. My reflection stared back at me, an aging woman with tired eyes, her hair silver and thin. I whispered to myself, "You're doing the right thing, aren't you?" But the answer didn't come. In the darkness, I imagined the surgery room, the cold steel table, the blinding white light, the smell of antiseptic. I imagined Melissa's face, that perfect mask of concern she wore so effortlessly. There was something in her gaze lately, something I couldn't name. When she thought no one was watching, her eyes were cold, sharp, calculating. I had seen that look once before on a woman who smiled while selling a lie. Still, I told myself it was just exhaustion, nerves, fear. A mother shouldn't suspect her own family. And yet, as I sat there, listening to the soft beep of the oxygen machine, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had signed more than a medical consent form. I had signed the beginning of something far darker. The next morning, I went to the hospital for pre-surgery tests. The nurse's words blended together: blood pressure, heart rate, anesthesia risk, but my mind was elsewhere. I caught sight of Melissa through the window, talking to a man in a dark suit. She laughed, her hand brushing his arm. When she noticed me watching, she froze for a second and then smiled too quickly, too brightly. "Oh, Mom, this is just the insurance coordinator," she said. Her voice was sugar. Her eyes were ice. Something inside me stirred again, that quiet, relentless whisper. Something isn't right. But I smiled anyway. I had learned long ago that sometimes silence keeps peace. That evening, Brian, my younger son, called. "Mom, are you sure about this?" he asked. "You've done enough. You don't have to prove your love." His words nearly broke me. But I told him what every mother says when her heart is divided. He's my child. I can't let him die. When I hung up, I realized how strange it was that Melissa had arranged everything so fast, the hospital, the papers, even the insurance. It was as if she had been waiting for this. But I pushed that thought away because the truth was unbearable. I wanted to believe my family was good. I wanted to believe I was saving my son. I wanted to believe that love, no matter how painful, was always the right choice. I didn't know then that love, when twisted by deceit, can become a weapon sharper than any knife. If you're hearing this right now, please take a moment to support this channel. Hit the like button, subscribe, and share it with someone who might need to hear it. Every gesture helps us keep telling stories that remind us how strong, how wise, and how brave a mother's heart can be. Now, before we move on, I'd like to ask you something. Imagine you were in my place, holding that pen, your child's life depending on your signature. Would you? A. Sign immediately, believing love demands sacrifice? B. Wait, ask questions, and risk being called heartless for hesitating. Write your answer A or B in the comments. I truly want to know what you would have done. The cold air in the operating room felt like a presence of its own, dense, alive, pressing against my skin. I had never seen so much white in one place. The walls, the sheets, the light above me, it all blended into a brightness that made my eyes ache. I tried to focus on something, anything, but the longer I looked, the more everything seemed to disappear into that colorless glare. I could hear the sound of my own breathing through the thin mask on my face, shallow and uneven. The rhythmic beep of the heart monitor cut through the stillness, each sound echoing like a countdown. The nurse adjusted the blanket over my legs. Her hands were gentle, but even through the fabric, I could feel the chill of her latex gloves. A metal tray clinked as another nurse arranged instruments, forceps, scalpels, syringes, each one reflecting the light like polished ice. I told myself I was ready, that this was just another step toward saving Andrew, my son. I told myself a mother doesn't back away from pain when her child's life depends on it. But inside me, something restless stirred, like an animal trapped behind a locked door. The doctor, Dr. Henderson, came closer. His voice was calm, practiced. "You'll be asleep soon, Mrs. Carter. Just focus on your breathing." I nodded, but my body didn't respond the way I wanted. My chest was tight, my fingers numb. I tried to smile, but it felt more like a grimace. I wanted to ask where my family was, to hear a familiar voice, a word of comfort, but the only faces in the room were hidden behind masks and goggles. Through the glass wall to my left, I saw movement. Melissa was standing outside, her arms crossed. Even from that distance, I could see how still she was, how perfectly composed. Her hair was neatly pinned, her lipstick untouched, her expression unreadable. The way she watched me made me shiver. Her eyes didn't hold worry or warmth. They held expectation, like a person watching a task being completed. I thought of all the times she had said, "It's for the best, Mom, you'll see." And suddenly, the phrase sounded like an order, not reassurance. I wanted to look away, but my eyes kept returning to that window, to the faint reflection of my own face beside hers. One woman about to lose a part of herself, another waiting for something I couldn't name. For a moment, I imagined what she might be thinking. Was it relief that the plan was unfolding smoothly? Was it pride for convincing me to agree? Or maybe it was something darker, satisfaction. The nurse leaned over me with a syringe filled with a clear liquid. "This will help you relax," she said softly. I watched the needle glint under the light, and a wave of dizziness washed through me before it even touched my skin. My heartbeat filled my ears, drowning out every sound except that relentless beeping. I thought of Andrew's face, his weak smile, his hollow eyes, and tried to hold on to that image. It was the only thing that kept me from drowning in fear. Still, something was wrong. A sound outside the glass caught my attention, a faint murmur, quick and nervous. Melissa was talking to someone, a man in a dark suit, his face half turned away. They were too far to hear clearly, but I saw her gesture toward me, her hand slicing through the air. The man nodded. My stomach twisted. "Doctor." Henderson followed my gaze for a second, then looked back at me with a fleeting uncertainty in his eyes before focusing on his work again. "Everything will be fine," he said, but his tone lacked conviction. He adjusted the monitor, checked the IV line, then motioned for the nurse to prepare the anesthesia. My body felt heavy, as if I were sinking into the table. I tried to speak to say that I needed a moment, that I wasn't ready, but my throat refused to make a sound. The nurse's hand rested on my shoulder, gentle but firm. "Just breathe, Mrs. Carter. It's going to be all right." The world around me began to fade into a blur of light and shadow. The only clear thing left was the sound, the heart monitor, the rustle of paper, the faint click of metal instruments. My thoughts floated somewhere between dream and panic. What if Melissa wasn't who she seemed? What if the operation wasn't just about saving Andrew? The questions pressed against my mind like voices trying to be heard through water. Then came the whisper, faint, but sharp enough to cut through the haze. I didn't know if it was real or imagined, but I heard Melissa's voice from behind the glass. "Sign it. Don't hesitate." My pulse spiked. I wanted to lift my head, to look at her, to shout that I had already signed everything, but I couldn't move. My hands were strapped loosely to the table to prevent sudden motion. My body was no longer mine. The anesthesiologist stood over me, drawing a line of light across my eyelids as he adjusted the lamp. The brightness burned, forcing tears from my eyes. I felt small, exposed, as though every secret I had ever carried was about to be laid open under that sterile light. I thought of the word Melissa had used so often, duty. How easily she'd said it, how easily I had accepted it. Was duty supposed to feel like this, like surrender? Dr. Henderson gave a quiet signal. "Begin the count." The nurse started softly. 10, 9. I tried to focus on her voice, but the edges of the room began to dissolve. The white light swallowed everything, the doctors, the tools, the sound. For a fleeting second, I thought of my grandson Mason, of his laughter, of the way he always looked at me as if I could fix anything. If only he were here now, I thought. If only someone would tell me that this was truly for good. Just before the darkness closed in, I caught one last glimpse through the glass. Melissa's face was still, but her eyes gleamed not with fear or pity, but something else, triumph. And then everything went black. The crash of the door was so sudden that at first I thought I was dreaming. 1 second, the nurse was lowering the syringe toward my arm, her voice soft and professional. "Deep breath, Mrs. Carter." The next, the door slammed open, echoing against the sterile walls. A gust of cold air swept through the room, shaking the tray of instruments so violently that a scalpel rolled and clattered to the floor, every head turned. Even the rhythmic beeping of the heart monitor seemed to falter for a moment. And then I saw him. Mason. My 9-year-old grandson stood in the doorway, his hair damp with sweat, his school uniform wrinkled, his small chest heaving as if he had run for miles. His shoes were streaked with mud, the soles squeaking against the polished floor. Behind him, a nurse was shouting, "You can't be here!" But Mason didn't stop. His eyes, wide and terrified, were fixed on me. "Grandma!" His voice cracked but carried through the room with the strength of a truth that refused to be silenced. "Don't do it! I have to tell everyone why my dad really needs your kidney." The syringe froze mid-air. The nurse holding it looked from me to the surgeon, waiting for a cue. Dr. Henderson's hand rose slowly. "Hold everything," he said, his tone cutting through the shock. He turned toward Mason. "What did you say, son?" The air thickened, as if the walls themselves were listening. I tried to lift my head, but the straps across my shoulders held me down. My pulse pounded so hard I could feel it in my throat. Mason stepped forward, clutching something in his right hand, an old phone, its cracked screen glinting under the surgical light. He looked so small standing among the towering adults, yet his voice trembled with a kind of courage I had never seen before. Through the glass window, I saw Melissa. Her face, once calm and composed, suddenly shifted. Her lips parted, her hands slammed against the glass. "Don't listen to him," she screamed. Her voice was sharp, frantic, almost unrecognizable. "He's just a child. He doesn't know what he's saying." But Mason didn't even look at her. His little hand was shaking, but his gaze stayed fixed on Dr. Henderson. "Please, sir," he said, his voice breaking. "Just listen. I found something on my mom's phone. She said things about the operation, about Grandma." I could see the confusion ripple across the room. The nurses exchanged glances. Dr. Henderson crouched slightly, trying to meet Mason's eye level. "It's okay," he said carefully. "You can tell us what you know." Mason swallowed hard. His lips trembled as he held up the phone. "There's a recording," she said after the transplant. "The test results would be perfect. That Grandma wouldn't dare say no. That it's worth more than anything." The words hung in the air like a blade. My heart skipped. I felt the blood drain from my face. The room went utterly silent. Dr. Henderson's expression shifted from disbelief to alarm. He looked at the nurse still holding the syringe and nodded. "Step back. Stop everything now." Melissa was pounding on the glass, shouting something I couldn't make out. Her parents, Mr. and Mrs. Grant, appeared behind her, their faces pale, their mouths moving in frantic protest. But inside the room, no one moved except Mason. He walked toward me with slow, deliberate steps, clutching the phone so tightly his knuckles had turned white. "Grandma," he whispered, stopping beside the table. His voice broke into a sob. "I didn't know if I should tell. But then I heard her say your name. She said you'd be gone after today." The phone slipped from his fingers and hit the floor with a soft thud. I felt something inside me fracture, a mix of terror, relief, and heartbreak. I wanted to reach out, to hold him, to tell him everything was going to be all right, but my body was frozen. Dr. Henderson bent down, picked up the phone, and glanced at me. "Do you permit me to play this, Mrs. Carter?" I managed a small nod, my throat too tight to speak. He pressed play. The voice that filled the room was unmistakably Melissa's, low, hurried, but crystal clear. "After the transplant, the data will be perfect. Don't worry. That old woman won't dare refuse. She thinks she's saving her son, but she's saving us." The recording ended in silence that felt heavier than any sound, the kind of silence that changes everything. Dr. Henderson stood frozen for a long moment before he spoke. "This is no longer a medical procedure," he said firmly. "This is a police matter." He turned to a nurse. "Call security now." As the nurse hurried out, Melissa's screams grew louder on the other side of the glass. "You don't understand. It's not what it sounds like." Her voice cracked, desperate. But the look in her eyes gave her away, wild, terrified, guilty. I watched as hospital security rushed in and restrained her. Mr. and Mrs. Grant protested, waving their hands, demanding explanations. The sight was surreal, these people who had spoken so proudly of family honor and sacrifice, now shouting like cornered thieves. Dr. Henderson came back to my side. "Mrs. Carter," he said softly, his voice a mixture of authority and compassion, "we're canceling the surgery. You're safe now." For a moment, I couldn't breathe. I could only stare at Mason, who was still standing near my table, tears streaming down his face. I whispered, barely audible, "You saved me, my love." He wiped his nose with his sleeve and nodded. "I just didn't want them to hurt you." I closed my eyes, and a single tear rolled down my temple. The fear that had been sitting in my chest for weeks began to loosen its grip. The truth had finally broken through the walls of deception that surrounded me. When I opened my eyes again, I saw the chaos outside the glass, Melissa being led away in handcuffs, her parents arguing helplessly with the officers, their voices fading down the hallway. "Doctor." Henderson stood quietly beside me, his hand resting on the table's edge, as if guarding me from what was left of that storm. And in the middle of it all, my grandson, small, brave Mason, was still holding his ground, the faint reflection of the surgical light shining on his tear-streaked face. I realized then that sometimes salvation doesn't come from those we expect to protect us. It comes from the smallest voice in the room, the one that dares to speak when everyone else stays silent. Before that day at the hospital, before the bright lights and the sterile air, my life moved in quiet, familiar rhythms. I used to think routine was comfort, the hum of the refrigerator, the creak of my husband's wheelchair, the sound of birds landing on the old maple tree by the kitchen window. Now I realize routine can also be a disguise, a thin curtain that hides what's falling apart. I lived in a small house on the outskirts of Milwaukee. It was modest, 2 bedrooms and a narrow porch that looked out toward the road where children used to play. My husband, George, had been bedridden for more than a decade. His stroke had taken away his words and most of his movement, but not his presence. He sat near the window in his wheelchair every morning, watching the sunlight crawl across the floor. Sometimes I spoke to him, even though I never knew if he understood. "We raised good boys, didn't we?" I'd say, and he would blink slowly, as if trying to agree. My sons had grown into men long before I was ready to let them go. Andrew, my eldest, was the one I depended on emotionally. He had a laugh that used to fill every corner of this house. I still remember the way he'd say, "Mom, one day I'll buy you a big house where you'll never have to worry about bills again." Life, of course, had different plans. He worked in construction, long hours under the sun, until one day he started coming home pale and exhausted. At first, I thought it was just fatigue, maybe a touch of the flu. Then the symptoms worsened: the trembling hands, the constant thirst, the weight loss. When he was finally diagnosed with kidney failure, I felt something inside me crumble. It's strange how quickly hope can turn into fear when a doctor says a word you don't understand. Brian, my younger son, was quiet, steady, and reliable. He worked as an electrician and came by whenever he could, always bringing something small, a loaf of bread, a bag of oranges, once even a bird feeder because he thought I'd enjoy watching the sparrows. He was the one who fixed the broken things in the house, the one who didn't say much but noticed everything. When Andrew got sick, Brian was the only one who didn't lose his calm. He'd tell me, "We'll figure it out, Mom," with a conviction that I wanted so desperately to believe. Then came Melissa. When she first entered our lives, I thought she was a blessing. She was beautiful in the kind of way that made people trust her instantly, soft-spoken, graceful, always carrying herself as though she were born for gentleness. Andrew adored her. He said she made him feel alive again. I wanted to believe it. I really did. After all, what mother doesn't want her son to find happiness? In the beginning, Melissa seemed perfect. She'd come to the house every weekend with homemade soup and a box of medicine, always smiling. She'd fuss over Andrew, making sure he ate, telling him when to rest, reminding me that he needed peace and not worry. The neighbors would stop by and say, "Evelyn, you're lucky. That's a good daughter-in-law you've got there." I would smile proudly and say, "Yes, God blessed us." But little by little, something shifted. It began with small things, a sharp tone in her voice when she thought I wasn't listening, a coldness in her eyes that didn't match her words. Once, I went into the kitchen late at night and found her there, whispering on the phone. Her voice was low, rushed, but I caught a few words that didn't sit right. "Don't worry. Everything is going according to the plan." I froze in the doorway, unsure whether I should interrupt or pretend I hadn't heard. When I finally asked who she was talking to, she startled, then laughed it off. "Just a friend from the hospital," she said, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. "You shouldn't stay up so late, Mom." After that, I began to notice other things. She kept a small notebook in her purse that she never left unattended. When I once tried to tidy the table and move it aside, she snatched it so quickly I almost dropped the teacup I was holding. "It's personal," she said with a forced smile. Andrew didn't notice any of this. He trusted her completely, maybe too much. When I'd try to mention my worries, he'd sigh and say, "Mom, you're imagining things. Melissa's been taking care of me better than anyone." I didn't argue, but my heart felt heavy. I knew what it was like to love someone so much that you couldn't see the danger standing right beside you. As months went by, I became quieter around her. I kept my thoughts locked inside, the way I used to when George was first ill, and people would tell me to stay strong. But even silence can't hide suspicion for long. I caught her watching me once, a calculating look that sent a chill through me. That was when I realized something very simple and very frightening. I didn't know who she really was. Brian noticed it too, though he never said it outright. He'd visit, look at Melissa, then look at me. his brow furrowed. Once, while fixing the kitchen light, he muttered, "That woman gives me a bad feeling." When I told him to be kind, he shook his head. "Kindness doesn't mean blindness, Mom." I didn't answer. I didn't have the courage to. At the time, I still believed family was sacred, that blood and marriage were enough to bind people in love. It never occurred to me that family could also be where betrayal hides most easily, under the warm illusion of trust. Looking back now, I see how all the signs were there: the late-night calls, the locked notebook, the way Melissa's smile never reached her eyes. But when you've spent your life sacrificing for others, you learn to silence your instincts, to choose peace over confrontation. And that silence, as I would later learn, almost cost me everything. If only I had listened to that unease back then, if only I had asked the right questions. But love, especially a mother's love, has a way of blinding you. And so I went on believing, telling myself that doubt was just fear wearing a disguise. I didn't yet know that fear was the only thing in that house telling me the truth. The morning Melissa came with her parents, the air in my house changed. It wasn't just the sound of their footsteps or the faint scent of her mother's expensive perfume. It was the way the atmosphere grew heavy, as if even the walls knew something was about to happen. I was standing by the kitchen counter, slicing apples for George, when Melissa appeared in the doorway with that same perfect smile. Behind her followed Mr. and Mrs. Grant, neatly dressed, their posture rigid and their eyes sharp. They looked like people who never entered a home, they entered a situation. "Mom," Melissa said softly, her tone rehearsed, "we need to talk about Andrew." I wiped my hands on a towel and nodded for them to sit. They didn't. "Mrs. Grant stayed standing, clutching her handbag like it was a shield. Mr. Grant looked around the room, his gaze pausing on the faded wallpaper and the wheelchair by the window. He smiled, but it wasn't kind. "You've done a lot for your family, Mrs. Carter," he said in a voice that carried both admiration and condescension. "Now it's time to do the ultimate thing. Your son needs you." Melissa placed a folder on the table and slid it toward me. "These are the final papers for the surgery," she said. "Everything is set," the doctor said, "the sooner, the better. We just need your confirmation." I hesitated, glancing at the folder. There were so many pages, insurance forms, signatures, terms I didn't understand. The letters swam before my eyes, dense and impersonal. "I thought we already signed what was needed," I said carefully. Melissa's smile didn't fade, but her eyes hardened. "That was the consent form," she said. "This is the rest: financial agreements, follow-up care, insurance coverage. You don't need to worry about the details. We've taken care of everything." Her father stepped forward. "You're a mother," he said, his voice firm. "A real mother doesn't hesitate." For a moment, no one spoke. The only sound was the faint hiss of George's oxygen tank. Then Mrs. Grant, with her elegant pearls and immovable poise, added, "You wouldn't want to live knowing you could have saved him and chose not to." The words struck something deep inside me. Guilt, sharp and familiar, rose like a tide. I looked at Andrew's photograph on the mantel, his graduation day, his smile bright under the summer sun. I had always believed that a mother's love meant saying yes, no matter how much it hurt. That was what I had built my life on: sacrifice. So why did this feel different? "I just want him to get better," I murmured. "Then don't think," Melissa said quickly, almost too quickly. "Just sign. Love doesn't ask questions, it acts." Her tone was gentle, but there was a warning beneath it. It reminded me of how she used to speak to Andrew when she wanted him to agree with her, a mix of affection and control. I had seen that tone before, but never directed at me. I tried to steady my voice. "I'll look through it tonight." Melissa's hand tightened around the edge of the table. "There's no time. Every hour counts." She leaned closer, her perfume suffocatingly sweet. "If something happens to him because you delayed, could you live with that?" I felt a burning behind my eyes. "Please, Melissa," I whispered. "You don't need to push me. I said I would do it." Her mother exchanged a look with her father, a silent message passing between them. Mr. Grant sighed and put a hand on my shoulder, a gesture meant to seem reassuring but heavy with pressure. "You're doing the right thing," he said. "You're a strong woman. Families like ours survive because of women like you." families like ours. The phrase didn't fit. It wasn't ours, it was theirs. That night, I sat by George's bedside, the folder open on my lap. He stared ahead at the television, but I knew he was listening. I read the first few lines over and over again, the words blurring together: liability, transfer, authorization. Each one felt like a door closing. I placed my hand on his and whispered, "Do you think this is what love means? Giving everything even when something feels wrong?" He blinked slowly, the faintest movement of his fingers brushing mine. Maybe it was his way of saying no, or maybe I just wanted to believe he said no. The next morning I went to see Andrew. He was half asleep, the machines around him beeping softly. His skin was pale, translucent almost. I brushed the hair from his forehead and said, "I'm going through with it." His eyes opened, and for a moment I saw the boy he used to be, the one who ran barefoot through the yard, who hugged me after every scraped knee. "Thank you, Mom," he whispered, and his voice broke something inside me. As I turned to leave, I caught sight of Melissa standing near the door, her phone in her hand. She smiled faintly, but there was no warmth in it, only triumph. "He's lucky to have you," she said. I nodded, though I wasn't sure if it was true. That afternoon, Brian called. "Mom, are you sure about this?" His voice sounded strained. "You know you don't owe anyone your life. Dad wouldn't want you to do this." "Andrew's my son," I said quietly. "I can't watch him die." He sighed. "I know. He stopped. "There's something off about her, Mom. Please promise me you'll be careful." I wanted to promise, but my throat closed around the words. I was too tired, too lost between guilt and duty. When I hung up, I looked at the folder again and saw my signature already there from the day before. I didn't even remember signing it. The following week, Melissa and her parents visited again. They brought flowers for the living room and new curtains to brighten the place. They sat in the same chairs, speaking softly about faith and family, about how God rewards those who give. I nodded in all the right places, but every word made me feel smaller, weaker, trapped. When they left, I found a note tucked under the folder. It was in Melissa's handwriting. "We're all counting on you." I stood there for a long time, staring at the sentence. For the first time in my life, I realized that love can be twisted into a leash, and sometimes the people holding it are the ones you once called family. It began with small things that seemed too ordinary to question: a missing pill bottle, a locked drawer in Melissa's study, a hushed phone call that stopped the moment I entered the room. Each time, she would smile that polite, careful smile and say, "Oh, Mom, you startled me." And each time, I forced myself to believe her. Because believing her was easier than accepting that something might be terribly wrong. But one afternoon, Mason changed everything. I was sitting on the porch folding laundry when he came running up the steps holding a drawing and a worried look. "Grandma," he said, his voice soft, "Mom keeps talking about medicine and data. What does that mean?" His words startled me. "What kind of data, sweetheart?" I asked. He shrugged, fidgeting with the corner of the paper. "I don't know." She said something like, "After the transplant, the data will be perfect." She said it to Grandpa on the phone. I froze. The word data didn't belong to family talk. It belonged to business, to laboratories, to deals that had nothing to do with my son's survival. I tried to hide my reaction, forcing a smile for Mason's sake. "Maybe she meant your dad's medical data, honey." He looked uncertain but nodded anyway, the way children do when they sense an adult is lying for their comfort. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every sound in the house felt louder: the ticking clock, the wheeze of George's breathing, the hum of the refrigerator. I sat by the window and watched the shadows move across the yard. A part of me wanted to dismiss what Mason said, to chalk it up to imagination. But another part, the quiet, instinctive part, kept whispering that it was a warning. The next morning, I went to see Andrew at the hospital. He looked weaker than before. His skin had taken on that pale, grayish color that frightened me. I brushed his hair back, pretending not to notice the bruises on his arm from too many needles. When I asked how he was feeling, he forced a smile. "Better, Mom," he said, though his voice was barely above a whisper. "Melissa says the doctors have everything under control." Melissa appeared in the doorway just then, holding a cup of coffee, her tone bright. "Mom, you shouldn't worry so much. Stress isn't good for Andrew. Why don't you rest? Let me handle everything." The way she said it, soft, sweet, final, felt like a door closing. For the first time, I heard authority in her voice, not care. Later that day, I ran into Brian near the parking lot. He looked tired, restless, his shirt untucked and his hands shoved into his pockets. "Mom," he said quietly, "I think something's not right." My stomach tightened. "What do you mean?" He glanced around before lowering his voice. "I saw her. Melissa. She was outside near the loading dock talking to someone, a man. I couldn't hear everything, but I caught something about payments and documents. When they saw me, they stopped talking. She said he was from the insurance office, but he didn't look like anyone from the hospital staff." I felt the world tilt slightly, like I was standing on shifting ground. "You're sure?" I asked. He nodded. "Pretty sure. I took a picture from the distance, just in case." He showed me his phone. The image was blurry, but it was unmistakably Melissa, standing with a man in a dark suit. Her body language told more than words ever could, her arms folded, her face tense, her eyes darting around like someone guarding a secret. When I got home that evening, I found a row of unlabeled pill bottles on the kitchen counter, next to Andrew's medication bag. I picked one up. The liquid inside was cloudy, the label torn off. I asked Melissa about it when she came by later. She barely looked up from her phone. "Oh, that's just some vitamins for Andrew," she said lightly. "The doctor suggested them." "What doctor?" I asked. Her eyes flicked up, sharp for a moment, before she smiled again. "You wouldn't know him. He's a specialist." Something in her tone made my blood run cold. She was lying, and she knew that I knew. But instead of anger, she smiled, calm, patient, dangerous. It was the kind of smile that tells you she's already thought of every word you might say next. After she left, I sat at the kitchen table staring at those bottles. My hands trembled as I opened one. It smelled faintly chemical, sterile. I poured a few drops into a tissue. It left a pale yellow stain. My heart raced. I didn't know what any of it meant, but I knew it wasn't right. The following days blurred together. Melissa grew more controlling, choosing who could visit, deciding what I should sign, talking to doctors on my behalf as if she were the patient's mother instead of me. When I questioned her, she'd tilt her head and say, "You must be tired, Mom. It's easy to get confused at your age." Those words stung more than any slap. Brian came by again one night, visibly upset. "Mom, I think she's hiding something big. I've seen her shred papers in the hospital office. She told one of the nurses to erase the last file, and she's been calling a number registered under her parents' business name." I didn't want to believe him. My heart refused to. But belief has little to do with truth. The truth was there, whispering around me, waiting for me to stop pretending. One evening, Mason handed me a drawing he made at school. It showed a big heart in the middle and a small figure standing beside it. "That's you, Grandma," he said proudly. "You keep everyone safe." His words pierced me. I wasn't keeping anyone safe, not Andrew, not Brian, not even myself. I was living in denial, wrapped in the illusion of love and duty. That night, I locked the pill bottles in a cabinet and wrote down every detail I could remember: the phone calls, the phrases, the way Melissa spoke to the man, the missing labels. My handwriting trembled across the page, uneven and desperate. I didn't know what I would do with it yet, but something inside me had shifted. For the first time since all this began, I allowed myself to think the unthinkable. What if the person I had trusted most wasn't trying to save my son but using him? The thought settled into my chest like a stone, heavy, cold, real. I sat there for hours, listening to the faint tick of the clock and the distant hum of traffic, knowing that a truth was forming in the dark, waiting for me to face it. The truth arrived quietly, without drama, just a trembling hand, a boy's voice, and a phone that wouldn't stop recording. It was late afternoon when Mason appeared again, his small backpack slung over one shoulder, his face serious in a way no child's face should ever be. He said, "Grandma, I think I found something." Those words were the beginning of everything. We sat at the kitchen table, sunlight stretching across the faded tablecloth. Mason took an old phone from his pocket, Melissa's previous one, scratched and cracked at the corners. "I was trying to play games," he said nervously, but I heard her voice. He pressed play before I could respond. The sound that filled the room made the blood in my veins turn cold. Melissa's voice was low, businesslike. "After the transplant, the data will be perfect. Mom Carter won't say no, she thinks it's love. That's what makes this foolproof." Then came another voice, a man's, her father's, "Mr. Grant. We'll get what we need. Just make sure the old woman signs everything. If she hesitates, remind her what's at stake." My hands shook. The kitchen blurred around me. Mason reached for my arm, worried. "Grandma, did I do something bad?" he asked softly. "Should I delete it?" I took his hand. "No, sweetheart," I said. "You did the bravest thing you could." My voice was calm, but my heart felt like it was breaking through my chest. I didn't sleep that night. I sat by the lamp with the phone beside me, replaying the recording over and over until every word carved itself into my mind. Melissa's voice, once gentle, almost musical, now sounded mechanical, sharp, hollow. It was the voice of someone who had planned every step. I thought of the way she had guided me, her insistence, her control, the way she called it duty. It wasn't duty, it was manipulation, dressed in the language of love. The next morning, I called Brian. "Come over," I told him. "Bring the photo you took at the hospital." When he arrived, I showed him the recording. He listened without interrupting, his jaw tightening with every sentence. When it ended, he sat back and whispered, "I knew it." He scrolled through his phone and showed me several new photos Melissa outside the hospital, handing a small black bag to a man near the parking lot. In another, she was holding a white envelope, her face half hidden by sunglasses. "She said it was insurance paperwork," Brian muttered. "But I checked the hospital's staff directory. That man doesn't work there." The room was silent except for the sound of my husband's oxygen tank. The rhythmic hiss felt like a clock counting down to something inevitable. "We need proof," Brian said finally. "Real proof, something no one can deny." I nodded. My voice trembled. "We already have it, but we'll need to be smart." For the next few days, we worked quietly. Brian contacted a friend who understood technology, asking him to back up the audio file so it couldn't be erased. Mason stayed close to me, his small presence both a comfort and a reminder of what was at stake. I tried to act normal around Melissa, though every smile she gave me felt like a blade. 2 days later, she came by unexpectedly, carrying a bag of groceries. "Mom," she said warmly, "I thought you might need some help before the operation." Her kindness was a performance now, every gesture too smooth, every word too polished. I thanked her and offered tea, forcing my hands not to tremble as I poured. She talked about Andrew's progress, about the doctor's optimism, about how everything was falling into place. The phrase sent a chill through me. When she left, Brian exhaled sharply. "She knows something," he said. "You saw her eyes?" "I saw them," I whispered, "and I've seen them before, the day she made me sign." That evening, we met with a private investigator named Mr. Duncan, a man recommended by one of Brian's co-workers. He listened carefully as we played the audio recording, his expression hardening. "This isn't just family pressure," he said. "It sounds like a coordinated scheme, possibly involving medical data or pharmaceutical research. If it's true, they're using your son's transplant as a front." The words made me dizzy. "Using my son?" I repeated, barely believing what I was hearing. Mr. Duncan nodded. "It happens more often than you think, ma'am. Testing new drugs under false consents, selling medical data. People assume it only happens in big corporations, but it starts small with trust." Trust. That word, once sacred, now felt poisonous. We gave him copies of everything, the photos, the recording, even the strange pill bottles I'd kept. He promised to investigate quietly. Before he left, he said, "If you get any pressure to move forward with the operation, call me first. Don't go alone." The next morning, I went to the hospital. Melissa was already there, speaking to a nurse at the counter. Her back was straight, her smile radiant. When she noticed me, she waved as if nothing had changed. "Mom, perfect timing," she said. "We're finalizing tomorrow's procedure." My knees nearly gave out. "Tomorrow?" I asked. "That soon?" "The doctors want to move quickly," she replied, her tone smooth. "It's safer this way." I felt my pulse hammering. Every instinct screamed that this was wrong. I could almost hear Mason's voice again after the transplant. "The data will be perfect." When I returned home, Brian was waiting. He had news from Mr. Duncan. Melissa's parents had financial troubles, large unpaid debts connected to a medical supply company. The company had recently signed a contract with a foreign lab specializing in organ-related drug testing. "It's all connected, Mom," Brian said. "They were counting on Andrew's case to get them a payout." I sank into the chair, my legs trembling. Everything around me blurred: the walls, the furniture, the pictures of my sons as children. It all seemed distant, unreal. Brian knelt beside me. "We can still stop this," he said. "We'll take this to the police, to the hospital board, to anyone who will listen." But I knew it wasn't that simple. People like Melissa didn't make mistakes. They made plans. And she had spent months wrapping me in guilt and devotion until I couldn't tell where love ended and manipulation began. That night, I looked at Mason sleeping on the couch, his small hand clutching a blanket. I realized he had done what no adult had dared. He had spoken the truth. And that truth had cracked the silence wide open. As I watched him breathe softly in the dim light, I made a promise to myself. I would no longer be silent. Whatever came next, whatever it cost, I would fight for the truth. Because sometimes the smallest, bravest voice is the one that saves not just a life, but a soul. The morning of the operation arrived, cloaked in a stillness that felt unnatural, the kind of quiet that presses down on your chest and refuses to lift. Dawn crept through the curtains in pale streaks of gold, but the light carried no warmth. I had packed a small bag the night before, some clothes, my rosary, and an old photograph of Andrew and Brian as boys. I looked at that picture for a long time before placing it inside. 2 smiling faces, covered in summer dirt, one holding a toy truck, the other a slingshot. I remembered that day vividly: their laughter, the smell of grass, the simple certainty that love would always keep us safe. That morning, that certainty felt like a lie I'd been telling myself for decades. Melissa arrived just after sunrise. She was dressed impeccably, as if for an event rather than a surgery. Her hair was pinned perfectly, and she wore a light blue dress that matched the color of the hospital walls. "Ready, Mom?" she asked with a brightness that didn't reach her eyes. Behind her, her parents stood like silent pillars, their faces drawn in feigned concern. Mrs. Grant carried a bouquet of lilies. The smell was so strong it made my stomach turn. "Yes," I said quietly. My voice didn't sound like mine. In the car, Melissa talked endlessly about logistics, forms, the hospital's efficiency. Her words ran together, smooth and quick, rehearsed like a speech she had practiced many times. I watched the city pass outside the window, the gray sky, the empty sidewalks, a world that seemed indifferent to what was about to happen. My hands were folded in my lap, but I could feel the tremor running through them. I wasn't afraid of the surgery itself. I was afraid of what I didn't yet understand. When we arrived at the hospital, everything moved fast. The receptionist already had my file waiting. The nurse greeted Melissa by name. Even the security guard nodded politely as if they were familiar faces. I remember thinking how strange that was. How had she come to know them all so well? They wheeled me into the pre-operation room. The air smelled of antiseptic and something metallic. A nurse placed a band around my wrist with my name on it. I stared at those black printed letters, Evelyn Carter, and wondered if that name would still belong to a living woman by the end of the day. Melissa leaned over me, her smile perfectly practiced. "You're doing a beautiful thing," she said. "Andrew will never forget this." "I'm sure he won't," I whispered. For a brief moment, her mask slipped. Her gaze hardened, calculating, before softening again. "You'll be proud of yourself, Mom." Then she stood straight and looked toward the hallway, where her father was pacing. "We're almost there," she said to him in a low voice I wasn't meant to hear. "After today, everything changes." The nurse returned to check my pulse. I closed my eyes, pretending to rest. Through the hum of machines, I heard their footsteps fade down the corridor. My heart pounded. After today, everything changes. What did that mean? A part of me wanted to get up, to tear the band from my wrist and run, but my body betrayed me. I had spent so long being obedient to love, to guilt, to family, that rebellion felt foreign. I told myself it was only fear, that I was being paranoid. But deep inside, that quiet voice, the one I had ignored for weeks, whispered, "No, you're not wrong. This isn't love. It's a trap." Hours blurred into moments. Nurses came and went, adjusting IV lines, asking me to sign another paper, one last authorization. I didn't even read it. I signed where they pointed, my name looping shakily across the page. Just before noon, they wheeled me toward the operating room. The hallway lights were harsh, unflattering, and each one I passed made me feel smaller. At the end of the corridor stood Melissa and her parents, waiting. Mrs. Grant's hands were clasped together in an almost prayer-like gesture. "God bless you, Evelyn," she said, her voice dripping with false piety. "Your sacrifice will not be forgotten." I looked at her then, really looked. Her eyes were not the eyes of a woman grateful for salvation, they were the eyes of someone who had already received what she came for. And beside her, Melissa held a clipboard, flipping through documents with quiet satisfaction. For the first time, I saw her clearly. Every smile, every comforting word, every gesture of care, it was all performance, a mask designed to control me. The gurney moved forward. The doors to the surgical wing opened with a hiss. I could feel the cold air spill out, sharp and sterile. The nurse adjusted the sheet over my chest, her voice soft. "You're very brave, Mrs. Carter." I wanted to laugh at that. Bravery, I thought, was not what brought me here. It was love twisted into obedience. It was faith without proof. Inside the operating room, everything was white and humming. The doctor greeted me, his tone distant but kind. I tried to focus on his face, but my gaze wandered to the glass partition. Beyond it, I caught a glimpse of Melissa again, speaking quickly to someone in a dark suit. She handed him an envelope, her gestures sharp, impatient. When she turned back, her expression smoothed as if nothing had happened. The nurse inserted the IV. "Count backward from 10, she said. I tried. 10, 9, 8. But the numbers tangled in my mind. Instead, I thought of Brian's warning, of Mason's frightened eyes, of the recordings locked safely in Mr. Duncan's care. I thought of all the signs I had ignored, the whispers, the bottles, the lies disguised as kindness. And then, through the fog of anesthesia, I made a silent promise. If I survive this, I will not stay silent again. As the drug began to pull me under, the last thing I saw was Melissa's face behind the glass, calm, poised, almost triumphant. It was the face of someone who believed she had already won. But fate, I would learn, has its own way of rewriting even the most carefully planned betrayals. At that very moment, somewhere outside that cold white room, truth was making its way toward me, carried by the small hands of a child who refused to stay quiet. The explosion of truth came not with shouts or thunder, but with a small, trembling voice. I remember the sound before anything else, a child's gasp, the clatter of metal, and then silence so absolute that even the machines seemed to hesitate. I was lying there, cold and helpless on the operating table, the anesthesia needle poised above my arm, when the door burst open and Mason's voice cut through the air like lightning. "Stop. Grandma, don't do it." Every head turned. For an instant, time itself froze. The bright lights glared down, bleaching the color from everything, even from my thoughts. I could barely move my neck, but I saw him, my grandson, his face flushed, his school uniform wrinkled, his sneakers splattered with mud. He looked impossibly small against the sterile white of the room. One of the nurses shouted, "Get that boy out of here!" But Mason didn't flinch. He stood in the doorway, clutching his mother's old phone, his hands shaking yet steady. "I have to tell everyone," he said, his voice cracking but clear. "My dad doesn't need Grandma's kidney because he's sick. He's sick because of Mom." The sentence fell like a hammer. Dr. Evans, the head surgeon, froze mid-step. The nurse holding the syringe backed away, her eyes darting to me. Through the glass, I saw Melissa slam her palms against the window, screaming soundlessly. Her lips formed the words, "Don't listen to him," but the sound never reached us. Mason ran toward me before anyone could stop him. He was crying now, tears streaking down his dirt-stained cheeks, but his voice grew stronger. "I have proof," he said, holding up the phone. "I have a video." Dr. Evans lowered his mask, his tone measured but firm. "Let the boy speak." A nurse hesitated, then nodded. The whole room seemed to hold its breath as Mason tapped the cracked screen. The video began to play. The audio was faint at first: wind, traffic, distant voices, but then came the unmistakable sound of Melissa's voice. "After the transplant, the results will be perfect. Don't worry, she won't refuse. She thinks it's love. We'll have all the data we need." Gasps filled the room. The surgeon's assistant muttered something under her breath. I turned my head slightly toward the window. Melissa was pounding on the glass, shouting now, her face contorted. "It's fake! He's lying!" she screamed, but panic had already replaced her composure. Mason handed the phone to Dr. Evans, who played the next clip. The screen showed Melissa standing in a hospital parking lot, exchanging a small package for an envelope. Beside her, Mrs. Grant's voice could be heard clearly. "This will finally settle our debts. The old woman won't suspect a thing." I felt something in me collapse, a soundless breaking, like glass shattering in slow motion. All the moments of doubt, every unease I had swallowed down, rushed back with brutal clarity. Dr. Evans took a deep breath. His voice was calm but cold. "Stop all preparations immediately. This operation is suspended." The nurses exchanged glances, moving quickly, pulling away the instruments, unhooking wires. The door burst open again. Brian stormed in, his face red with fury. "Where is she?" he shouted. He pointed through the glass at Melissa. "You poisoned my brother. You lied to all of us." Chaos erupted. Hospital security arrived. Melissa's parents tried to flee, but the guards blocked the exit. "Mr. Grant argued furiously with the surgeon, waving his hands, but his voice was drowned out by Mason's sobs and the alarm beeping in the background. Dr. Evans turned to one of the nurses. "Call the police," he said sharply. "Now." Melissa was still shouting from behind the glass. "I did it for science, for his recovery. You don't understand." But her words no longer mattered. The truth had already stripped them bare. Her mother tried to defend her, insisting I had manipulated the child, but even she could see there was no escaping what the videos showed. As the security guards escorted them out, the room grew still again. I could feel the sting of tears behind my eyes. Not relief yet, just exhaustion, the kind that comes when the heart finally stops pretending. Dr. Evans approached me, his tone gentle now. "Mrs. Carter, you don't have to be afraid anymore. We've canceled the operation. You're safe." Safe. The word felt foreign on my tongue. I turned my head toward Mason. He was standing by the foot of the bed, trembling, his little fists clenched at his sides. I reached out weakly, and he came closer. I touched his cheek. "You saved me," I whispered. "You saved all of us." He nodded, his lips quivering. "I just didn't want you to get hurt, Grandma." Brian came to my side, his hands rough and warm. "I told you something was wrong," he said softly. His voice cracked. "But I didn't think it was this bad." Tears spilled freely now. "We all wanted to believe in her," I murmured. "We wanted to believe love couldn't turn cruel." By the time the police arrived, the corridors were filled with whispers. Reporters would come later, of course, but in that moment, it was only the sound of truth settling into the air, heavy, undeniable, irrevocable. They took Melissa and her parents away in handcuffs. Even as she passed by, she tried to keep her composure. "I did nothing wrong," she said, her voice trembling between defiance and despair. "Everything I did was for him." No one answered her. The echo of her words faded into the hallway. Dr. Evans turned back to me. "Your son will recover with dialysis," he said. "He doesn't need a transplant right now. What he needs is time and the right treatment." I nodded, too drained to speak. Mason was still holding my hand. I could feel his pulse against my skin, fast and alive, and in that rhythm was the one thing Melissa had never understood: love that doesn't exploit, love that protects. As they wheeled me out of the operating room, the lights above blurred together into a soft glow. For the first time in months, I didn't feel the weight of fear pressing on my chest. The truth had come crashing in, burning everything false to ashes, and though it hurt, it also set me free. That night, as I lay in my hospital bed, I looked at Mason asleep in the chair beside me, his small hand still wrapped around mine. I realized that the smallest, most innocent voice in the room had done what no adult had dared. He had told the truth, and because of that, we were alive. The days after the revelation blurred into something unreal, as if the world had forgotten how to move naturally. One morning, I woke up in the hospital room, sunlight spilling weakly through the blinds, and realized the weight in my chest was gone, not because the pain had disappeared, but because the fear had finally loosened its grip. For months, I had been walking through a fog of deception, love, and guilt. Now the fog was gone, and what remained was truth, cold, heavy but freeing. Andrew was alive. He was weak, pale, and grieving, but alive. When I walked into his room, he turned his head slowly, eyes red from tears and exhaustion. "Mom," he whispered, his voice hoarse, "is it true? Everything Mason said?" I sat beside him, my hand trembling as I brushed his hair away from his forehead. I didn't know how to answer. How could I explain that the woman he loved had turned his illness into currency, that his suffering had been orchestrated by those who were supposed to protect him? So I did what mothers do when words fail. I held his hand and let the silence speak. "It's over now," I said finally, though I wasn't sure I believed it. "You're safe. We all are." The police had taken Melissa and her parents into custody that same night. The newspapers called it the Grant medical scandal. It made headlines across the state, a drug testing and data laundering operation disguised as organ transplant research. The recordings, the photos, the forged hospital documents, all of it came to light. Melissa's calm, calculated tone from those recordings was played again and again on local news. I couldn't watch. Hearing her voice made my stomach twist. Dr. Evans visited often in those days. He was the kind of man whose composure didn't crack easily, but when he stood at the foot of Andrew's bed, there was a gentleness in his face that hadn't been there before. "Your son is responding to treatment," he said one morning. "The dialysis and medication are working. It will take time, but he's strong." "And the investigation?" I asked quietly. "They found evidence in Melissa's emails, money transfers, lab orders, communications with pharmaceutical intermediaries overseas. It's bigger than any of us thought. She'll be facing years in federal court." He paused. "If your grandson hadn't spoken up, none of this would have been discovered in time." Mason. Just the thought of him brought tears to my eyes. That small boy had carried the courage of an army. When I went home after discharge, he was waiting on the porch, holding a drawing of our family. He had added something new, a shield over my head, drawn in bright red crayon. "This means you're safe now," he told me solemnly. I pulled him into my arms, feeling his heartbeat against mine, and realized he was right. Brian moved back into the house for a while to help with Andrew's care. He repaired the fence, repainted the kitchen, and filled the place with the kind of quiet presence that had always steadied me. One evening, as we were cleaning up after dinner, he said softly, "Mom, I know you want to forgive her." I didn't answer. "But you don't have to," he continued. "Some people don't earn it." I thought about that for a long time. Forgiveness wasn't for Melissa, it was for me. Yet, even as I told myself that, I knew there were things that couldn't be erased. The image of her standing behind that glass, eyes sharp and unflinching, would live in me forever. Weeks later, Andrew asked to see her. I hesitated, but Dr. Evans believed it might help him find closure. At the detention center, Melissa sat behind a glass partition, wearing a beige uniform. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a hollow stare. "Andrew," she said when she saw him, her voice brittle, "I wanted to save you. I thought if the trials succeeded, we'd have money for treatment." "You poisoned me," Andrew said quietly. "You almost killed my mother." Melissa's mouth trembled. For the first time, she had no rehearsed answers, no lies dressed in logic. I took Andrew's hand and led him away before he could hear her cry. Behind us, I heard the dull thud of her fists against the glass. Time softened the edges of the chaos, but it didn't erase them. Andrew grew stronger, though he carried scars no doctor could heal. Brian started working with an organization that helped victims of medical fraud. Mason, my little hero, became a symbol in his school. His teacher called him the boy who spoke the truth. I attended one of his assemblies. When they mentioned his bravery, he just blushed and looked down, whispering, "I just wanted Grandma to live." And me, I rebuilt my life from the quiet up. The house no longer felt haunted. The ticking clock, the hum of the refrigerator, even the creak of George's old wheelchair, all of it sounded like peace now. I began volunteering with a local foundation that educated seniors about healthcare rights and guardianship fraud. Every time I spoke, I thought of women like me, those who loved so fiercely that they became easy prey. I told them, love should never demand your silence. If something feels wrong, it probably is. On my last day at the hospital, Dr. Evans handed me a sealed envelope. Inside was a simple letter. "Thank you for your courage. Because you spoke, the hospital has reformed its consent system. No one will ever sign blind again." That night, I opened my diary, the same one I had kept through every sleepless hour, and wrote the final page. Blood makes you related, but truth makes you family. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is to believe your own doubt. The rain started outside, tapping against the window like a gentle reminder that storms can cleanse as much as they destroy. I closed the diary, took a deep breath, and whispered a prayer not for vengeance, but for peace. Because in the end, it wasn't the betrayal that defined us. It was what we did after the choice to stand, to speak, to rebuild. And as the thunder rolled softly over the horizon, I knew that even in the darkest chapters, the truth will always find its way to the light. When everything ended, what remained was not bitterness, but clarity. Evelyn's story began in a place many of us know too well, a mother's instinct to give, to protect, to sacrifice. For years, she believed that love meant silence and surrender. But through pain, betrayal, and truth, she learned that love without respect is not devotion, it is imprisonment. Her survival was not just physical, it was spiritual. When she stood up for herself, when she chose to question instead of obey, she reclaimed something far greater than her safety. She reclaimed her worth. The entire ordeal revealed the dark truth of manipulation disguised as family loyalty. Melissa's deceit wasn't born overnight, it grew in the silence. Evelyn once called peace. Yet it also revealed something radiant. Courage can come from unexpected places. It came from Mason, a 9-year-old boy who spoke when every adult chose to look away. It came from Brian, who refused to let fear define his family. And most of all, it came from Evelyn herself, the woman who found her voice after decades of being quiet for others. In the end, justice wasn't only in the courtroom, it was in the way Evelyn chose to live afterward, with boundaries, compassion, and purpose. She taught us that age does not make us powerless, and that wisdom is not about enduring pain, but recognizing when to stop it. Protecting others begins with protecting yourself. In a world where manipulation can wear the face of love, awareness becomes your armor. Learn to ask questions, to trust your instincts, and to believe that saying no does not make you unkind, it makes you free. Evelyn's journey reminds us that self-respect is not selfish. It is the foundation of every genuine act of love. If you take anything from her story, let it be this. Courage isn't loud. Sometimes, it's a quiet choice made in the stillness of a kitchen, with trembling hands and an unshakable heart. And that small act of courage can change everything, not just for you, but for those who will come after you. Now, I'd love to hear from you. Do you think forgiveness is necessary for healing, or is it enough to simply move forward in peace? Please share your thoughts in the comments below. Your perspective might help someone else today. And if you found meaning in Evelyn's story, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel. Your support keeps these stories alive and gives us strength to create more heartfelt content for you in the future.